Oké, goedenavond allemaal. Mijn naam is Erik Paredis. Ik werk als postdoctoraal onderzoeker aan het Centrum voor Duurzame Ontwikkeling van deze universiteit. Welkom op de vierde avond van Studium Generale. Ik ga over een half minuutje naar Engels overgaan, omdat op deze vierde avond hebben we twee internationale sprekers uitgenodigd die ons gaan inleiden in een paar perspectieven op duurzaamheid en duurzame consumptie, waar dat we hier bij ons heel weinig mee vertrouwd zijn.
What I will start with, however, is some kind of brief overview of what we have learned over the past 3 evenings. Some lessons learned, you could say, some insights of what we have learned over the past 3 evenings. There's always, of course, some introductory remarks. If you want to work as a student here, you can also do that at our university, at the sustainability office. The Duurzaamheidskantoor is still looking for people. Please turn all your mobile off. Okay, and the presentations and videos of all evenings. I'm not sure if also of the second, but of the others are available at our website if you really want to. If you're really enthusiastic. Okay. What have we learned over the past 4 evenings? Just in something like 10 minutes, some insights of what we have learned over the past 3 nights. I think when Thomas and myself were discussing this question, we came up with what we have called 4 discourses about sustainable consumption, 4 discourses and related practices about what is sustainable consumption and how can you work on that. And the first one is probably one that we are most we're most aware of it, and that is most often used. We've called this kind of guiding the consumer, you know. The consumer is more or less rational. We know how to choose, but it's not always rational in the sense that he or she chooses sustainable options. So we have to guide this consumer towards more responsible choices. And how can we best do this? By building a kind of what has been called during the second lecture, a choice architecture. You build all kinds of things around the consumer. You try to enable him, or you give good examples. It has been called the 7E model for those of you who are present. And 7E models, you try to give good examples, exemplify, engage. There were other E's. And you build this kind of architecture around the consumer so that he or she goes in the right direction. Behind this, there's clearly the idea of consumer sovereignty. The consumer can choose and can influence markets in that way. Different choices mean different influence, and in that way you can steer markets in a more sustainable direction. This was also true for what we heard last week of the Wereldwinkel, world shops or fair trade shops, where we had a whole discussion afterwards with people from Wereldwinkel, because they also really believe that consumers can make a difference. If we have enough people going to the Wereldwinkel, to the fair trade shops, then we may perhaps go in a more sustainable direction. But this was also a more politicized version of this, because they also said it's not just that, it's also a kind of political problem, it's a structural problem, but still we believe that we have to guide as many people as possible to our shops. Okay, that was some kind of first discourse that we noted over the past few evenings. The second one gives a very different perspective in a way on what sustainable consumption is. The second one says, well, the connection between wealth and consumption on the one hand and quality of life on the other hand is in fact a very limited connection. Of course you need some kind of wealth, but at a certain moment this becomes an obstacle to what really a good life is. And one of the what I found a nice expression was that one of the speakers said, moderation is enrichment. Matiging is verrijking. That was the idea. And on her website, it was Green Evelien who was present. And here on her website you also have this picture which says there are two ways to get enough. One is to continue to accumulate more and more, and the other is to desire less. And that was really, I've had two speakers who were thinking clearly in this direction. Desire less, moderation. And one of the main arguments we heard that is, if you consume less, then you need less money, then perhaps you can start to work less, and then you have more time to do more valuable things than consume. That was in fact one of the important arguments there. What surprised us in fact was that this is also in fact presupposes, at least in the way they told it, a high degree of consumer sovereignty. Really consumers who can really choose to go in this direction. We are consciously going to moderate our consumption. And if you go to the website, for example, of Green Evelien, you see an enormous lot of examples about how you can do this. Okay, that was the second discourse that we heard. The third one is what we have called that we should think about. It's a kind of rights discourse. You know, we should develop a right for everybody, a right of access to qualitative and sustainable consumption. That should in fact be a right for everybody. That was mainly told by people who are working with poorer people in our society. And the idea behind it was that currently a lot of sustainable consumption initiatives are only accessible to a privileged group. And they can buy themselves into more sustainable consumption patterns. But this is not the direction they want to go. They say we have to think about kind of right for everybody to have access. And the idea that this may have a transformational potential, because if you do that, then you are going to involve new groups in this, and a kind of democratization of this debate by involving new groups in what is then qualitative consumption and how can we get a right for everybody to have access to it. You see an example of this on the Rabot site and the website of how they are working, in particular around the right, the access to qualitative food. Okay, and then the last discourse goes a little bit, perhaps a little bit in the same, working also on this idea of democratization and political aspects. It was that what we should do is turn consumption, if you wanted to discuss sustainable consumption, then the main thing we should do is turn consumption from an individual problem into a public and collective problem, not of consumers, but of citizens. We should not talk about better consumers and better programmed consumers thanks to this choice architecture, but we should work with articulate citizens. And in that way, you know, this is really also changing consumption here becomes a political question that needs public debate and collective choices, and not the individual consumer who should be guided towards better choices. And if you want to read more about this, you know, the speaker of last week, Walter Mensink, has written an interesting book about that, starting from the fair trade debate. You know, can you buy a better world? That's his question. And he says, yeah, perhaps some aspects, but in the end, it should become a public debate about this and a public choice. Okay, a very brief overview with some main lessons we have learned over the last 3 nights. Now our final night, and we are, I can say, a little bit proud that we have 2 distinguished speakers here. In fact, we have to admit that when we look at the debate and also the scientific research in our country, in Flanders, in Belgium, most of this is quite traditional kind of research, which is very much situated in the first discourse. And the other 3 or 4 is very limited research that we have on that. So we are not that well connected to the international debate about sustainable consumption and the international debate about research into sustainable consumption. So we are very proud that we have 2 people here who are very well connected to this international debate and who are going to present to us 2 perspectives that we may be lacking a little bit here in the country and also in our research. The first perspective is, and Daniel Welch will go into this in detail, of course, it is what is called a social practice approach to consumption. And the second is what Sylvia Lorik will do, is go into what she calls a strong sustainable consumption approach.